Okay, that's good. Okay, good morning. We continue after a short break for Pesach. Hemshechayim Beis, Volume 2. What page are we up to? I believe we're on page 11.
Tzadik Daled.
Yeah, 1194. Aleph Kuf Tzadik Daled. Right, correct. Okay. So we're doing a little summary just to get us all up to speed, including myself. Get the sound up. 1 minute. I gotta get this down. Give me a minute. I'm trying to get rid of the other sound. Sorry, I still have to fix something here. Apologize again. Okay, this should be good now. So let's sum up what we're learning here. Overall, it's an explanation in the two phrases in the verse. V'yadaita Ayin v'shavesa levavecha ki havayu elikim v'shamayim mimal v'aretz mitachas eined. So in the previous discourse, we learned v'shamayim mimal v'aretz mitachas was to negate a duality between God in heaven and God on earth. That negating the argument that you find godliness primarily in the spiritual, not in the material. And the truth is that mitzvahs maisius, actionable mitzvahs in this material world, is God is to be found equally than in the spiritual, and even more so, that's the kavanah, the intention. In this discourse, Lech Lecha, which began on page 1189, he said, Omnam yesh lemer oid. Let's discuss, says Omnam. However, we can explain this, not just the Pirush HaPashat, as he called it. On page 1182, he said that the Pirush HaPashat, the way he said, Al Pi Pashat yesh lemer, the obvious explanation. Here he went further, and his explanation here is also Mamata Lamaila, that we discovered via Daita Ayin, that we come to this awareness and cognition and emotional experience, and that B'Shamayim Mal V'Aretz Mitachas is referring to the two levels of Das Tachten and Das Elyon. The Ha'aretz Mitachas is the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. We discover the godliness that is invested in and creates and energizes existence. What he called the Er HaGvul, which is affected by the Tzimtzum that it's measured and it's concealed within the creation. And Shemayim Imal, I'm reading now from page 1190, just summing up, is the Gili of Er HaBlikvul. Er itself, with the Tzimtzum, also had an impact, but there the impact was that it caused the Er to recede, and the Er HaBlikvul, that awareness of the divine consciousness that encompasses everything beyond existence, that we come to reveal that as well. That's what he called Havai de Le'ela. And then came a discussion of the advantage of Er HaBlikvul over Er HaGvul, because it's not limited and it reflects more the expansive nature of the divine. This is all on page 1191. Okay. And this included also understanding that even though the Tzimtzum did have an impact, that Abligvul, the infinite light, should not be conscious to us, but nevertheless, the light itself, as he pointed out, recedes. It itself was not concealed. It was just concealed from us. And they spoke about the Rishimu, that the Rishim also did not have it, Tzimtzum also did not impact, and yet it's considered a Shim compared to the Er HaBlikvul, because it means only a trace, only a limited element as compared to the infinite expansiveness of infinity. Okay. Since we're already reviewing, I should mention, of course, that he distinguished that between the Ein Sof of Atzmus, which is completely undefined. It's not even compared to, it's not even called infinite. It's not defined. The Shlilas HaKer, Shlilas HaGvul, Shlilas HaBlikvul, Shlilas HaChiv, Shlilas HaShlila. But nevertheless, there's something that this Er HaBlikvul reveals, and that's the second statement, or the Shemayim Mimal in the verse, to reveal that aspect. Okay, that was the top of page 1192. To continue on the summary, and again, I'm saying it for myself as well, and hopefully it's helpful to all of us, just to go through this. He said, and that's the two meanings, the two statements, Havaya Lakim, in the words of Eliyahu Hanavi, that they reflect these two different dimensions. B'Shamayim Mimal La'aretz Mitachas. Yeah, two levels of Havaya Lakim. The Gili air of Nishtalshlus, and the Gili Havaya Le'ela, the infinite light. I should mention as well, it slipped my mind, but it's good, it's important, that all this is being explained through the context of what happened with Eliyahu Hanavi. Why the Taka said twice Havaya Lakim, and the meaning of what it says that Eliyahu healed Vayirapeh, that he healed Mizbeach HaHarus. You mentioned before for Shafton, that's where Rashi brings it, but what's the exact lashon? 1 second. Where was the piece about Shafton? Before. Was that earlier? That's good. Where was the piece with Eliyahu? We asked.
It's Kuf Tzadik. In Kuf Tzadik. Like 10 lines from the top. B'Shaftim Simin Hey Chaf.
Yeah, no, but I'm asking where he asked the question, why it's called refuah, healing. That I found. Where's the piece about the healing? Oh, okay.
It's,
1192.
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Beis.
Yeah. So 1192 to continue the flow. So then he says, so how then do we draw down, now that we've established that the pasuk, the verse V'yadaita Ayin, is coming to teach us how to reveal in a concealed state in the Tzimtzum, Havaya Elikim, that in the Elikim of the Tzimtzum we discover the Havaya, the Latata, that divine energy within existence, and Havaya Dileil, the divine energy beyond, the infinite divine energy. How do we do it? So there he cited the Maimorim that we learned earlier on page 992, that's Derech Chaim Techachas Musar. That is through the transformation, the afflictions and the challenges we have in life. And here he brought Eliyahu, that by Eliyahu it says, Vayirapes Mizbeach Hashem al-Harus, that he healed the destroyed or the defiled or desecrated Mizbeach. And he asked the question, what's the refuah here? So this began a discussion, what is the Mizbeach? Mizbeach is Malchus. Malchus, the fire on the Mizbeach is the yearning and the Ratzai that we learned about. The yearning and the seeking of Malchus to connect to the higher levels. What he called was that the Lashon Malchus, Isha, Eish Hey, should connect with Eish Yud. And that El Isha to Chukosach. Right. The Malchus, the Tzemeya of Malchus, the Soma, the thirst to connect to the letter of Yud. And that began the discussion, the difference between the dark flame and the white flame. So let's sum up what he said there on page 1192 and 1193, that he referred back to the concept of that Bereisha Chashecha v'Hodin Nehera. A day consists of evening followed by day. Everything begins with the Tzimtzum, concealment night, that leads into day. And he went on to explain how that's in Seder Shtalshus. The whole Seder Shtalshus, we find that order. That first there's the Tzimtzum, and then there's a revelation. He explained that B'chol HaNevroim, in all creations you find a neshama b'guf. The guf is a state of concealment. The neshama is a state of revelation, like Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, like a flame. And the same is throughout the whole order, the whole structure of existence. Daimim, Tzemeach, everything, and Malachim, everything has a body and a soul. And the goal, of course, is to reveal the soul within the body. Now, explain that the soul does not create the body. Even though in the higher worlds, in the spiritual worlds, the soul, the body is emerged from the soul, but in our physical world, the body is not created by the soul. It only energizes it. And nevertheless, which indicates that there are two different opposites. Body and soul are two different opposite entities, and they come together. And Gashmi. But the guf comes from the chashecha, from the concealment, from the tzimtzum and the shiur, which is the root of the containers. And the neshama comes from the earth, from divine energy, revelation. Yeah. So even though the creation travels through the kav and is what carries down the power of creation, but it does not. But the creation itself, the structure itself, is rooted in its own source, in the concealment, in the simple. Okay, that was a long discussion about Kalim and And he went on to say that the Kalim are like Oisius, letters. Letters are not the ideas that are conveyed by the letters. There's a difference between, and there's a difference between the letters or the Kalim of Malchus and Zah like the difference between the letters of speech, of thought and speech. In thought, the letters are very much connected to the idea, to the Oyer. In Dibur, they're disconnected. And they're also more tangible. I'm reading now the page, on the bottom of page, middle of page 1193, just to get us where we are. Okay. And yet, and he compared the difference that the Kalim of Zah, like thought, are compared to colors, the colors of light, the colors of like an apple, which don't have any real entity of their own. They're only a reflection of the personality of the thing that it's a color of. Whereas when you talk about Mekelim and Malchus, that's a Levush HaNifrid. It has its own personality, Levush HaNifrid. And they are tangible. So therefore they conceal even further. And this, of course, are the letters that God used when he created the world, Asarim Amoris, that's Malchus. So all this is coming to explain Eish Shchera, the dark flame, the dark light of Malchus, because it's a light that goes through darkness and originates in darkness. Okay, so that's the Eish Yisad Dibur. So at the bottom of page 1193 concludes, so therefore these letters have a chemer and a tzura, the actual physical body of the letters, of the containers, that's rooted in the darkness, and the ideas and the tzura of the letters is rooted on a deeper level in the light. That's on the bottom of page 1193. So first comes cheshech and then comes oil. And he explained that now on two levels. One, in the level of actual creation. Both in the way, the source, the root of how creation happened. So first came, God desired a world. And what came? First came a Tzimtzum. That created a darkness. And what remained was a Neshima, which was also in a state of concealment. So these are the letters that are concealed and is submerged within the infinite light before the Tzimtzum. After the Tzimtzum, they now have emerged, but they're still in a state of concealment. And that's the root of containers. And then came the light, Ein Sof, which is the Kav, the ray, the stream of light and the consciousness that comes into existence. That's the Kav. And then on top of page 1194, he goes on, the same thing is also the creation on the lower level. Not just in the root of creation, but in the actual process of creation, you also find that. That first comes the Asius of the Asarim Amoris. And he gave the example of speech, that when you speak, so he said that when you say Asius Tachi, for example, it comes like an air in a keli. So it comes through the breath, which creates through the gutturals, the mansapach, creates the actual letters. And within them, it manifests the idea, or the oir, as he puts it, melubish be'er, er hasecho v'amidis, which is expressed through these letters. So what you feel first when someone speaks, you first hear the words. And then from the words and the letters, you come and derive what is the idea, the oir being conveyed. So nirgish tchila, hachemer nirgish tchila, first you feel that, and then you come to understand the idea. And that's why Resha Chashecha, first comes the darkness, first comes the concealment to allow tangible letters to be expressed, like he said, a teacher, that he teaches an idea. So the first thing the student hears are words, are letters. He doesn't understand yet all the depth. As he continues to grow, he comes to understand it, and until the primary understanding and depth, that happens after 40 years. Okay, so you see the bottom line is cheshach and then oir. And that's why Malchus is called Isha. Isha, Havai, the Hay. Hay is the general Hevel, A hey is like, it's the breath itself. And from there become all the letters originate from that. So the first thing is in Malchus is cheshach, it's concealment. And that leads to the light that it draws from there. This is why it's called Eish Chera Liyeshem Chines Eir HaMeiras HaCheshach. Because this is a light that radiates and illuminates the dark state. And the Eifana Eir, and the way the Eir comes is through being mislavish in clothing itself, or misalam, and concealed in these letters. So even though the Eir does illuminate the letters, but it's still all in a concealed state, commensurate with and channeled through the letters of expression. And that's why then he went back and said the same thing is with the Eir in the higher level. Remember, we said also in the root, first comes the Tzimtzum and the Rishimu, and then the Kav. So he said, the Kav also was preceded by a concealment, and its purpose is to bring the divine energy within existence, not beyond existence. So therefore, the Kav, its inyan is to radiate and illuminate the worlds. So this is the Eir of Mamala Kalalman, immanent energy that manifests in the worlds, like that flow, like a soul within a body, and it travels through, and it's channeled through the Cheshach HaTzimtzum v'Salmus b'Teich HaKelim, v'Harizeh b'Chinas Eish Chera. And this is therefore is the level of dark flame, the Pnei Sheklos Eir, because the general light is not a light to reflect the divine infinity. It's not purely just divine expression. It's a divine expression commensurate with and tailored to and defined by the structure of existence. So he calls that so there's two elements in why we call it dark flame. One, its purpose is to illuminate dark, and second, it comes through darkness. He keeps saying those 2 points. I believe that's where we stopped. Or maybe not. Did we go further?
We went further. You were talking about, then you went on to say about B'chinas Eish Levanahu, or Shalom.
You know what? Yeah, you're right. We did go further, correct, for sure. But you know what? Maybe I'll just begin from here. Why not? How far did we go? Remember?
Yeah, we went to the next page, maybe 2.5 lines in.
Of 1195. Okay.
Yeah, correct. Until Shehu B'chinas Gilui Orin Sof. That's where we finished.
Okay, so this sums up what we've learned so far, except this last piece, which we also learned. I'm thinking whether I should just start from here or just sum it up. Let me think. You know, I'll sum it up, but I'll go through the lines. So I'm reading now, I'm summing up the second half of page 1194. Okay, so he says now like this. That's Eish Chera. So we have a long explanation of why that flame is called the dark flame. And to sum up briefly, because it's all impacted by the Tzimtzum, and its purpose is to radiate the darkened, the concealed state post-Tzimtzum, both in the root, meaning the Tzimtzum and the Kav, and also an application when it comes down to the actual creation from Malchus, the 10 Asarim Amoras, the letters of Tache, or whatever the letters of the 10 statements God made, and all of creation through those letters. So, Eish Chera, what's Eish Levena? He's going to compare this now to the Er HaBligvu. This is the other level. Remember, we spoke Shamayim Mimal Aretz Mitachas. All this is coming to explain that concept that he began to say how he brimamshich Er HaBligvu. Remember, Techachas Musa Vayirapa, the healing of the broken Mizbeach Malchus. So he's discussing now how that is healed. So he's going back now. So the second dimension is Levana, Levana, the white light. So what does he say about the white light? He says like this. This is above and beyond, altogether beyond cheshach. And he makes the comparison now, a muscle for these two types of light from the sun. The light of the sun, sunlight, or the reflection of the sun, which radiates the dark world. In other words, let's say it's night, then the sun begins to shine. The sun, at the break of dawn, sun begins to send light to this part of the world. So it's Me'eres HaCheshach. That's the purpose of the sun. Vayitan Elokim, God, Vayitan Eisam Elokim Loheir Al Haaretz. That's its role, is to radiate the world, like the first level of Eish Shchera, of the dark flame. How does it do it? Through the nartik, through the sheath, the mogin, the sheath or the shield that conceals and that covers and conceals. That's Shemesh and Mogin Hashem Elokim. So Hashem is the Shemesh, is the sun, compared to the sun. Mogin, the shield, is compared to Elokim. So that is a good example for the dark flame, a light that illuminates and travels through a concealment. I'll just mention the parentheses, which we discussed. Elsewhere, he says the difference between the light of the sun to the color of an apple is that the color of an apple doesn't have any purpose. It's completely only reflecting the source. But the light of the sun does have a purpose to radiate the dark world. Okay, I explained, I think when we learned it last time, I think I explained what he comes to add in his parentheses. The difference between two levels of Oyer. One is an Oyer that's completely like the Oyer HaBlikvul in a way. Like the Oyer of, if you remember the Kalim of Zah, that they're like the colors. Kalim of Malchus is already like speech. So he's comparing the sun that radiates the darkness to the lower level, a light that has an impact, its purpose, and a higher level of Kalim would be the Oyer of like the colors of a fruit, of an apple or of light. Okay. What's the comparison to Eish Levana? That's the Moed HaShemesh. The sun itself. Not the sunlight that's coming through the mogin of Elokim, through the shield. And its purpose is to illuminate the world, the darkness. The sun itself is higher than this level. And what is that Lamaila? This is not Eir HaMamala. This is not the light that's coming to permeate, the imminent energy that's coming to permeate and to energize existence, the darkness. This is Eir HaSeviv. Its role is not to radiate and illuminate the world. Seviv remains always transcendent and beyond. What is its role? It's Gilei Atzmus. Its role is to reveal its source. That's all its role is to do. Similar to the color of the apple or to the colors of light. Maybe I shouldn't say that exactly because this is Eir HaSeviv, not Kalim of Zah. So maybe I take that back. But it has a certain comparison because one is just to reflect the source and one has a purpose to radiate the darkness. So Seviv's role is not to radiate darkness. It's to reflect what is God like. As we discussed at length, that the Eir HaBlikvul gives us a taste of godliness in more of God as he is on his terms, not on our terms. Malach Almin is the divine Ish Shchera, which is like the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, that's a divine on our terms, as God relates to existence. Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia, Tatshe, Aretz, all the Asarim Amaras that relate to existence. Now we're talking about the Eira Seviv, that his role is not to radiate and relate to existence. It's about revealing the source. And therefore, Ein Misalim, and it's not concealed in the darkness and the concealment of the Tzimtzum. Okay, but now comes the big qualification. Didn't we say earlier that the Tzimtzum had two impacts? One on the Eir HaGvul, made sure that it's limited and measured to go and create each keli, each container, and each level properly. The world's Ach, Akudim, Nekudim, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, Chachma, Bina, Das, the 10 spheres. And the Eir HaGvul, the Tzimtzum impacted that it should not, its consciousness that dominated and consumed, omnipresent, before the Tzimtzum, everything, the Tzimtzum impacted that it should not affect the existence of the independent consciousness that was created through the Tzimtzum. So the Tzimtzum did have an impact. So why are we saying now that this is a level of Eir that is not affected by, like he says, the words, so he says, even though through the Tzimtzum the energy was removed and concealed, as we learned earlier when he spoke about the two levels of the Tzimtzum, right here on page 1190, which referring back to the Maimer Vahi Ha'ona, the Pesach Maimer earlier, which we discussed, which was referred to there, Vahi Ha'ona B'Cheshach, right? And we also learned in the Maimer Vayikra, in his Bar Leil Dibra Maskal Vayikra, the B'chinas HaSiluk, who shenisha b'keach v'lei b'peil. Now, what was the impact of this Tzimtzum? Is that Eir HaBlikvul, the Eir HaSeviv, that was completely encompassing everything, in the language of the Eitz Chaim, Amal Kol HaMetzias. It should stay in a form of potential, not actuality. In other words, before the Tzimtzum, it's in its actual state. That's the only consciousness that exists. The Tzimtzum caused that it should be in a state of koyach and not b'peil, meaning not b'peil in actuality, in our reality. And it was explained there as well that this is like al derech hayechelis. So I remember I reviewed this, what this meant. We went back to the Maimer Vayikra. I suggested that everyone should look it up because he's going to say Yu'un Sham to look there. And what does he say there? That's the state of Yechelis. Yechelis is even more than koyach. Koyach and poil is like saying you have the potential to throw something, and then you actually throw it. The koyach hazrika, or the koyach haksiva, the power to write, and you write. The power to conceive an idea and then actually conceiving it. Yechelis is deeper because Yechelis shows on the capacity of the soul to achieve something. Yechelis is always a higher level than koyach. So he explained there that if there goes into the state of Yechelis, that's what he explained in Vayikra. Now came the next step of the discussion, which I'm going to sum up again now, is okay. So what do we know from this? We know from this that the Tzimtzum didn't impact it. We learned, I'm sorry. I should say the exact opposite. We know that the Tzimtzum caused this Eir to recede into a state of koyach and yechelis. So what does it mean when we say that the Eir HaSeviv is misalim b'chinas chesher v'helam hatzimtzum? Is eina misalim, I'm sorry. Eina misalim b'chinas chesher v'helam hatzimtzum. So we'll soon understand this, he's going to explain it. But right now we have these two different spaces. One talks about the effect of the tzimtzum on this infinite light, and one says that the infinite light is beyond being concealed within the tzimtzum. Now, the question, of course, then is, which one is it? Does the tzimtzum impact the Eir HaSeviv or does not? Based on what we're learning here, he wants to say not. That's why it's called white light, white flame, because it doesn't have any relationship with darkness. But based on what we learned earlier, it seems that it does have some relationship. So now the Rebbe Rasha brings from another place of Chassidus, the Mokim Macher, Muvur, and the place I remember where this is discussed is the Maimer Odom Ki Yakriv Samach Vav. I don't know if I mentioned it last time, Adam ki Yaakov samach vav. What does he say there? Mokamachem avur. The eagle agadol. Now, eagle agadol is era seventh. Eagle means the great eagle, the great circle or sphere, is a divine energy that remains after the tzimtzum, but not within the tzimtzum. It's like the light around the space. That's called eagle agadol. So it's seventh, it's makif, what he calls seventh, and it says naga by a tzimtzum. The tzimtzum impacted it, touched it. In some way, it impacted the eagle agadol. What was the impact? The impact is not on the light itself, but it should not extend as it did before the tzimtzum into the space. So to use the example of a teacher who has, let's say, an infinitely brilliant mind, he wants to teach a student. So what he does is he withdraws. Let's say he's in the process of thinking or teaching and expressing all his infinite potential. But now he needs room for a student, a beginner, like we said before, who only can read Aleph Beis, or only can understand the bare minimum. So he can't allow himself to just fully, in an unfettered way, without any breaks, to express himself. So the Tzimtzum causes his brilliance to recede, but it remains intact. Nothing happens to it. It doesn't disappear. From the teacher's point of view, however, the teacher has it, but he doesn't allow it to extend and impact the student. So the Tzimtzum, in that sense, Naga Bayat Tzimtzum, that the Tzimtzum did impact the Igul Hagadol, in the sense not impacting it, limiting it, but impacting and limiting it not to flow within this space. Like I gave the example with sea and land. When the world was created, it says everything was covered in water. Then the Abishta separated and said, there should be land, so the water recedes. The ocean was not compromised in its own power because it went back into its own place and it's still powerful sea. It just was told, here's your boundary. You cannot extend past the line between land and sea. So a real tzimtzum, a complete, when you say noga by a tzimtzum, it means it only impacted. When you say a full tzimtzum, you don't say noga by a tzimtzum, for example, on the Eir HaGvul. On the Eir HaGvul, you say there was a complete concealment. Because the Eir itself is going to be limited and diminished. I should rephrase that. I want to rephrase that because it's not the right way to state it. Not that there wasn't a tzimtzum. That the tzimtzum impact is direct. It's not just telling the Eir to remain here and not come here. In other words, you stay bli gvul, but the bli gvul cannot impact the space where the gvul or the identity and the consciousness of the independent student will emerge. But the gvul is absolutely driven by the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum directs it and guides it, and there's now a kav. In other words, the Igul HaGadol, if you were to say, what is the difference between the impact of the tzimtzum and the Igul HaGadol, and the sever, and the light that surrounds the tzimtzum, and the impact of the tzimtzum and the Eir HaKav, it's very clear. The Eir Igul HaGadol, the tzimtzum is only in its so-called, in the negative sense, that it can't flow here. In the Kav, it's in the positive sense. The Kav, first of all, the Kav, there was no Kav before. And the Kav follows the total darkness. The Igul HaGadol was there before. The only thing is now it cannot be in this space, so to speak. Obviously, we're talking here all conceptually, not in time and not in space, but conceptually. The Eir HaKav didn't exist before, and it was just told, wait. It didn't exist. It comes only after there's a tzimtzum. Now, a stream of consciousness comes from the teacher to the student. So what's the difference between the tzimtzum's impact on the stream of consciousness and the tzimtzum's impact on the brilliance of the teacher? So the brilliance of the teacher, the impact is, according to this mimer, that noga b'at tzimtzum. The impact is that it should not affect the student, but the Eir itself remains intact in its own place. The impact of the stream of consciousness is absolutely direct, because it's causing it to be only a stream of Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. It's flowing. Its purpose is to radiate the darkness, and its way of flowing is through the concealment. In the Igul HaGadol, its purpose is not to radiate the darkness, and its flow is not impeded by the Tzimtzum. It's just limited not to flow inside of the space of the student space. So what he said earlier about Lahoyres HaCheshach, that it comes to radiate and illuminate the darkness, and it comes through a concealment, that's only in the Kav, the Eragvul, in the stream of consciousness level of light. The light that will become the light that enters into and creates existence. Whereas the Igul HaGadol is a light, its purpose is not to radiate this space, it's to remain outside of it, but it shouldn't impact it. So Naga by Tzimtzum, yeah, but you can't say that there's the full Tzimtzum in that level. That's according to the explanation that's Naga by Tzimtzum. Remember, there's also an explanation that the Igul HaGadol was not affected by the Tzimtzum at all. I don't know if he's going to go to that. I don't remember now. Let me see what he says here. What time is it? We'll go a few extra minutes unless you guys got to go, because I started late, so we'll just go a little more. Try to catch up to where we stopped before Pesach. So let me see here. 1 second. I'm glad I ran through this slowly again because it needs explanation that I didn't fully explain, I see last time. Look at Emek HaMelech, like I explained, Emek HaMelech is one of the students, the Kabul from Rabbi Yisrael Sarug. It's a different Meseira, a different track of Arizal's teachings that Chassidus brings together. Shar Aleph Perek Nun Gimel, he says Perek Nun Zayin, the Ayin Gimel Gvuras. I didn't look it up. I would want to look that up. But clearly something there that helps us understand this idea of an oirad, of a gvura, that's not impacting the flow, but it's more like restraint. I think that's also a good way psychologically to explain the difference. In the Igul HaGadol, the gvura, the tzimtzum is naga by its restraint. Restraint, to restrain the light from not flowing beyond the tzimtzum, or into the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum, the gvura, that impacts the kav, on the other hand, is not just restraint. It's shaping it and causing it to be streamed exactly according to the containers of the recipient. So he says gimel gvuras. So maybe he talks about these different levels of tzimtzum. I'll look it up and I'll get back to this. Okay. Well, the fizet nida, and according to this, it appears the Rebbe Rashab says the sham meira oir k'moshe yekoidem, that there in its own place the Igul HaGadol radiates exactly as it was before the tzimtzum. In other words, there was no change in the actual Igul HaGadol. The only shift is, like he says, so according to this explanation, the only thing of the tzimtzum, it shouldn't extend. But like I mentioned with the ocean is not weaker because it cannot come onto land. It still rages with its full intensity. God didn't say to the ocean, slow down or calm down. It just said, don't cross this line. So in its own state, if you said, what was the water like when it covered the entire earth? And what is the water like once there was a boundary between land and earth? The water didn't become weaker. It's still full intensity, as we see. Well, you could always argue we don't see what it was like. But based on this explanation, the only thing is, here's your line. You can't go over this line. You can't cross this boundary. That the Rebbe Rashab interestingly says Venira. In other words, it doesn't say it explicitly, because you could still argue that maybe the tzimtzum also impacted the Igul HaGadol, that it shouldn't be that intense. You could make that argument. But based on the fact that he says Noga tzimtzum means that the air should not extend, he says Nira, that it means that the light of the air HaSever, the Bligvul, remains intact. Does not change. It's exactly as it is. It's still a pre-tzimtzum consciousness, let's put it that way. And its effect is only that it should not extend and allow itself to be felt within the consciousness of the gvul, or the tzimtzum, the post-tzimtzum consciousness. I have more to speak about this. I just want to see what he says. There's a lot more to say on this topic, which we'll get to shortly. Vasiluk, and when we say siluk of the tzimtzum, hurak legabi mokum achol, it's only in comparison to the mokum achol. Ikeilu einer. In other words, the student does not sense the cholol, the space created for the independent consciousness, does not sense at all as if it doesn't exist. But he only says keilu einer. Why? Because the Igul HaGadol still exists. It's just in a state that is not being affected, not affecting and not allowing the student or the cholol, the space, to sense it. So it's keilu einer. But the Igul HaGadol in its own state, if you were able to be in that state, it's a pre-tzimtzum consciousness without impact. So this, in effect, is answering his qualification. Why did we say that the tzimtzum? You said before that this level of light is ein misalim b'chinas chesed v'helam tzimtzum. It doesn't get concealed in the state, in the darkness and concealment of the tzimtzum, when we know that we learned earlier that it does get concealed. She explained the concealment is only in context of the perspective of the recipient, not in its own consciousness. So that's how he explains these two dimensions here. So there's an element, yes, from our point of view, we need to reveal the Eir HaBligvul. That's the whole Aveda, the Yadaita Ayin B'Shamayim B'Mal, to reveal the Eir, the Eish Levona. But from the point of view of the Eish itself, of the light itself, it's white, it's pure and undiluted. Nothing affected it. So in other words, it's only an effect compared to the recipient. That's what he says right now. Okay, I don't want to bring in other things from other Ma'amarim, even though it's important. I will just say the following before we read further. And maybe we will stop after that. The significance of all of this is not just semantics. Like, who really cares? Did it affect, did it not affect? It has real implications. The implication and application is as follows. Remember, the whole theme here is that through our avodah, mamata l'mayla, from the bottom up, the Yadaita Ayin B'Shavis L'Vechas, we shouldn't just have a relationship with the Avayol Lekim Ala Oretz Mitochas, meaning the divine that relates to us, but that we should also come to an appreciation and a cognition, an understanding, and emotional experience of the Avayol Lekim, the second Avayol Lekim of B'Shamayim B'Mal. Now, an argument could be made, maybe we don't have access to that. That is, it's beyond existence, because as we learned at length, all of existence is predicated on the Tzimtzum, which brings us back to the big question that's going on now for 400 pages, 300 pages, from the Pesach Maimarim, that can we actually have a pre-Tzimtzum experience? Because you can make the argument, as I just said, that you can't. That our ceiling, our glass ceiling, is we can reveal the divine within ourselves, on the Neshama, within our food, within our drink, within our material world. We can climb all the way to the Tzimtzum, but that's it. Pre-Tzimtzum is only godly, is only God's domain. We can't have access to it. But as we learned that Ayin Beis, Chassidus in general, does not want to limit our experience, that we can also have an experience of pre-Tzimtzum. And that's what God wants. So how's that possible? So we learned earlier at length that we don't bypass the Tzimtzum, we don't surrender to it, we transform it. Because the whole purpose of the Tzimtzum was not to limit us, it was in order to allow us to access godliness. In other words, the Tzimtzum was not a punishment, or I shouldn't even use that word. The Tzimtzum was not meant to limit, the Tzimtzum was meant to experience God, but in a way that we shouldn't be annihilated. So even pre-Tzimtzum consciousness is also for the purpose ultimate for us to experience it. God doesn't need Ayin. We need Ayin. However, we cannot begin with a pre-Tzimtzum Ayin because it's too pure. It wouldn't allow us to be. It would be like a student being completely overwhelmed, or frankly, it wouldn't be even room for a student. So we must begin from the bottom up, an Ayin that's limited. But the goal is to reach pre-Tzimtzum. But here's the issue. So now, if the Igul HaGadol and the Eir HaBlikvul pre-Tzimtzum is impacted by the Tzimtzum, so then we also get a limited form of it. We will get something more transcendent than the Eir HaKav, than the finite energy, but it's still going to be limited because the Tzimtzum had impact on it. By saying that the impact is not really on the Eir itself, only in our relationship to it, what the Rebbe Rashab is achieving is that once we are acclimated and capable of assimilating that energy, we will get it in its purest form, because the Tzimtzum really did not impact the Eir itself, it only impacted our experience with the Eir in order for us to exist. But like he said before, when you reach 40, you're able to reach levels of the depth within the letters of the teacher as you climb the ladder, as you climb and grow through the stepping stones, to the point that you can get even the Eir HaBlikvul, because the Eir HaBlikvul really was not impacted by the Tzimtzum, and we can get it now through our work, and we'll get a pure, undiluted experience of Eir HaBlikvul, which reveals the divine that's beyond existence. But of course, you can't jump there without going through the earlier steps. So that's really what's achieved there. If as soon as you say the Eir HaBlikvul would be deeply impacted by the Tzimtzum, in other words, it would be diluted, not like the Nira Lamer. When he says, Lefiza Nira, that the Eir remains exactly as it is pre-Tzimtzum, we're achieving the goal that when we will get to it, we will have something really pure that was not impacted. If the Tzimtzum would have impacted the Eir HaBlikvul, that it's not the same Igla Gadol as the Eir, as it was before the Tzimtzum happened, we again would have a limited experience of Blikvul. We'd have some Blikvul, but not full. Now we're able to also experience the Blikvul in its full glory, with all the qualities we learned about on page 1192 and 1193 of how that infinite energy reveals the divine in an unfettered, unlimited way. That's why I think this is critical. This is my explanation why it's critical to make these points, because he wants us to be able to have a full Mal experience. Okay. I think we should stop here because it's pretty heavy as it is. The Rebbe Rashab is going to go even further now. He's going to say something even more than what we learned right now in the context of what happens with this Eir HaBlikvul. It's going to take more than 3 minutes to explain. It's already 10 to 11. 1 second. Look at that. Yeah, I think it's better to stop here. And we'll continue from the bottom of 1194. Though we learned it, never hurts to learn again. But if anybody wants to ask anything, I mean, there's more to talk about this, obviously, so I'm not finished. But if you have any questions, please.
This Gimel Kavurais, does that speak about that anywhere else? I've heard about Hey Kavurais. Never heard about Gimel Kavurais.
Well, I said I will look in the Emek HaMelech because that's where it's rooted. Let me just see one thing. Now, I want to point out one more thing is that before we, if you look, you have Ayin Beis Volume 2?
Yeah.
If you look at the bottom of page 688, he talks about the Gimel Gvuras. I don't know if it's the same context that we're learning here. You see?
The bottom of the page, Shin Lamed Hey.
I said Tafresh Beches. I said 600.
No, Sif. It's Sif Shin Lamed Hey. Whatever.
I said Reish Peirik Shin Lamed Hey.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Look at the line, second line from the bottom. But I don't know if that's the Emek HaMelech.
Okay, thank you.
I will look it up. I'll look it up. I have to look it up. I can't tell you right now. But I will point out another thing. Yitzchak, before Pesach, when we discussed this, had pointed out the language, that it's in the passive tense. So I pointed out to him that if you go back to the page, let me look it up. With the Rebbe Rashab starts talking about the derech, the osa that Kodesh Baruch Hu osa kama tzimtzumim, derech kama elamis. I think it'd be made worthwhile looking there because it could help understand some of the things we're learning here. So what does he say there? Let me just
page 832.
Yeah, right. 832. Tough Lamed Beis. Let me see. Yes, so there he explains briefly the difference between the Tzimtzum and Elamus. That a Tzimtzum could be, I'm just using the language he says, that Hagam Shat Tzimtzum Gufa Husilug V'Helam Ha'er Hinezeu Ba'er Sof Gufa Shenesalam Ha'er. The Tzimtzum is an Ein Sof itself. It's like the teacher himself is restraining, and the ideas that are flowing are receding inward. It says like that. So it says, in other words, you don't have, let's say, like the sheath or the shield of the sun. That's an actual object that you use to shade or to somewhat filter the sunlight. That would be like putting on shades. When you say it, Tzimtzum, he says, that's a concealment within yourself. You're not using something to conceal yourself with. You yourself are restraining your flow. That's what he says there clearly. And the kav is them and believe sons. Yeah, but then he goes on to say, but when he creates a world, elements, that's already an existing entities that God is creating containers that actually have substance that are doing the concealment. It's not just the energy itself. I'm just pointing it out because it could help understand a bit how the difference between Eira Blikvul and Eira Gvul. Eira Gvul, you have a Tzimtzum that actually impacts, and the Rishimu that create the root of containers, and the Eir is impacted by that. For Eira Blikvul is really not an impact on the light itself because it's receding within itself, like I explained before. Just adding that point may be helpful, maybe not. I'm not sure. But if you want to look it up, you could look it up there. As I said, we'll stop here at the bottom of 1194, and I'll resume from the piece Ach Gam, what he's coming to add now in that.